when we discover our own self-deception, that is the filter. That's one of the most uncomfortable realizations a human being can have. But that is the litmus test for our ideological bias.
Hello, Mindplexers, and welcome to another episode of our Dream Wonders podcast. Today, I have with me Adam Widawski, who is the founding director of Logos Training Labs. And guess why? Because his superpower is no other but being a wordsmith, aka a very good communicator. And as far as I know, Adam is a philosopher concerned with the philosophy of life and a few other things which we are going to delve into today. And what I am hoping to achieve with this podcast is to find out if wise AI is possible. So, Adam, no big challenge thrown at you. Welcome to the podcast. I hope you
Hello,
will survive this. Welcome.
I'm delighted to finally meet face to face. Michaela, thank you for the opportunity to share thoughts, and we have a lot in common, obviously, within the realm of AI, and I guess we share values in terms of AI being beneficial for humanity. So I'm quite excited for this.
That's right. And if you want to introduce yourself a bit, if not, we can delve directly into with a little bit which I said about you. We can delve directly
Sure.
into.
I can just. What can I add? I can add. I spent most of my life studying philosophy and teaching philosophy and languages, educating people for the past 25 years, and in libraries, researching and writing and kind of contributing to different projects, especially over the past maybe 4 years. I've done a bit of AI research, and this is what brings us together because we kind of have common interest in Ian McGilchrist and different thinkers, some of whom are your friends. And I think it's an interesting conversion to have this conversation because, yeah, is wise AI possible? There's been so much said about wisdom and Moloch, and the journey from Moloch to wisdom is something we are kind of tasked with. So I look forward to exchanging ideas with you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And yes, indeed, we met in the context of discussions on artificial intelligence and sentience and how can we actually achieve beneficial singularity, right? Which is now it's a race everybody is rushing towards. You are a philosopher concerned with, as I mentioned, the philosophy of life, and I as I was jumping on the recording link, I just happened to listen to Yuval Noah Harari, and he was saying something which kind of took me completely by surprise, because a podcast which we had like a few episodes before this podcast with you, I had on as guest Michael Shermer, who is the founder of Skeptic magazine, and he just finished a book called Truth. And he's, of course, the podcast was about that. And
I saw that podcast, by the way, so I'm familiar.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. In the age of AI, can we achieve it or not? But just now, I hear Yuval Noah Harari, who blew my mind, saying that the purpose of exchanging information and of information in general is not truth. And it shouldn't be truth because truth hurts, truth this and that. And he said the purpose of information is to connect. And I just wonder, because for me as a scientist, and maybe for you as well, I would die for the truth. And this is what I do. That's what research is doing, scientific endeavor and pursuit, finding the truth. And Noah Harari is telling me now, no. Information is there to connect. And indeed, we connected over sentience, discussions, and so on. But what would be your take on that? Just briefly before I delve into our own topic. Sorry to surprise you with this.
No worries.
But you are the philosopher. So.
This is spot on. This is one of the best topics. Actually, I spent some time when I was doing my master's. I studied Nietzsche, and one of the current topics of Nietzsche's philosophy the scholars are really kind of battling over is the value of truth, in fact. So what you just said, that the value, not the theory of truth, not like whether it's correspondence of fact to a word, or is it different kinds of, we can talk about truth, pragmatic, different things. Not that. It's like, why do we value truth, right? So I'm like you. I have this instinct for truthfulness being very super important, right? But we also know that self-deception is adaptive too. Like nature deceives. We have different creatures that pretend to be something else to survive and so on. We do the same. We kind of manipulate with language and with communication, but I think there is still that in at least some of us. Like, clearly, okay, so information is to connect. I guess that is true, basically true, because if we don't connect, then there is no communication, right? So it's not really, that must do that function. And sometimes you can connect within a flawed paradigm, let's say, and it's not truthful, but it connects, right? But I think that, through,
and I have so many examples. I don't want to delve into those,
sure,
but yes, of course, everybody can think about it. Of course, yes.
yeah, I think this thing about why we value truth, I can tell you from through Nietzsche. This is I actually wrote an essay on that, and that was a super great learning for me, because for him it was, obviously we had the big religions have the revealed truth, right? So the prophets had truth, and they were inspired, and they wrote these scriptures, and then people lived their lives according to the revealed truth. And then we ended up in the Enlightenment, kind of moved on to scientific truth. We don't need those myths anymore. They would say we now can verify, we have empiricism, we have rationalism, and so on, and we can verify these things. But now we are atheists. We don't need that. But Nietzsche would say, no, there are actually metaphysical underpinnings of this will to truth, which you're saying it's so important for you as a scientist, and for me as a philosopher, saying we still value that truth, but it's not really rational. So in that sense, to this extent, I would agree with Harari, perhaps, that it's not, we like to see it as something very rational, but there is no rational basis, since we've kind of relegated God with a religion like standard religion with the revealed truth. We relegated that to kind of superstition and myth back, say, 300 years ago, 500 years ago. So we don't really have, Nietzsche would say, an unconditional basis for valuing truth, when like truth as unconditional. Truth becomes kind of, this is a big problem now, isn't it? Because we want to be 100% truthful, but if we do, we get crucified and cancelled and all sorts of things. So
Yes.
so yeah, we can't really be like full on truthful. There's always the balance, right?
I agree. And such a good example with the counselings. I completely agree. And most people who I praise for being truthful have been cancelled, actually. Yeah, most of my people who I respect, and so on and so forth. So what I wanted to follow up here a bit, because of course I want to start with what you are most interested in, but you already mentioned metaphysical underpinning. So, and as far as I know, this is one of your passions, yes, metaphysics. And the the question is here, and I think it connects quite nicely. And you please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a philosopher. I'm just a mathematician, AI expert. So the question is, what is wisdom? So if information is there to connect, maybe it's wise not to say the truth, right? So in the context of metaphysics, I mean, or in whatever other context, what would be wisdom? If we are to even talk about wise AI, we have to have an idea of what wisdom is. Would you would you endeavor to let me know something about that?
Yeah, well, so we have these. Obviously, we can go back to the ancients and the ancient wisdom and the wise man, archetypal, shamanic individual, and when I think that the basic distinction could be made between wisdom and intelligence, and wisdom and rationality. So what I found very useful about a couple of years ago, around the time of Rebel Wisdom, when Daniel and John Vervaeke, all of them, the kind of the Rebel Wisdom was very central. So I started really researching wisdom at that point, and what I found most kind of useful for scientists, I guess, the scientific account of wisdom was John Vervaeke's. He defined it as the limits of our when we actually, the aha moment, right? When we think we can be very high, we can be very rationalistic about something and being completely in an unwise direction, right? We can do very foolish things with a lot of intellectual sophistry. So that is not wisdom. That might be the opposite of wisdom. However, the wisdom is, as far as I understand it, is when we actually have the moment of the insight of, no, it's all wrong. This is the whole framing is incorrect. So I have to actually be able to reframe my entire experience of whatever I'm dealing with. So this is why when we talk about AI, and once Daniel said something, and it really made me think. I mean, kind of made me align with what he said. I always had known it, but then he kind of spelled it out, that wisdom is not algorithmic. That was the beginning of my journey into algorithmic conditioning in AI, and how we get kind of colonized. Our thinking gets colonized by the kind of linear and kind of sequential thinking and solutionist kind of mindset, and being fixed in our ways, right? So it seems to me that wisdom is that moment when the aha moment, the moment of insight, you cannot really predict or engineer it. It kind of comes to us as if we receive it through fostering the conditions for its arrival when our model breaks down. That's how I can make sense of wisdom in a few words.
Fascinating. I find it really, because it's to me it's a fresh perspective. I always thought, oh wow, yeah, if you get to a certain age, you will have experience, and I always related the wisdom with experience. Yes, and it's like, okay, so now I have more patience. Let's say, yes, with my kids, I wasn't that wise. With the grandkids, I can be wiser and stuff like that. But it's a completely new perspective what you're saying now, and I think it's what you're saying is more of an internal process, and this insight. I was very fortunate, not with Daniel, but with another integral philosopher, Bonita Roy. I took some workshops on collective insight practice. And indeed, it was this kind of process. So, in dialogue, in a circle, when you create a certain environment there and exchange information, insights, and then you all reach a certain aha moment. And I think what you are talking about is more related to that. And this one, of course, when I was cringing a bit when you mentioned what Daniel Schmachtenberger said, that wisdom is, and this is very wise, of course, that wisdom is not algorithmic, right? Because indeed, uh, this is kind of, I'm like, okay, so we have the answer. We cannot create wise AI, but I think the answer would be, okay, we can create wise AI, but not algorithmic. And can we do that? But I will get back to that, unless you want to say something now.
Yes, I do actually, because what Singularity Net is trying to do. I've done a little bit of research, and
Thank
what
you.
Singularity Net is supposed to be, as far as I understand, is all these AIs conversing, right? All these AIs learning from each other. So perhaps wisdom cannot be algorithmic, but perhaps it can be trans-algorithmic.
Emergent, yes.
Emergent, not yet. So it cannot be within any one algorithm, but somehow, if there's spontaneity, but then also, obviously, there's an issue of embodiment coming with it. And I don't think, wisdom is also is connected to the flow state, right? To the state of, which is a biological state when you condition the body, and there's the very the whole yoga tradition and all of that. It's that the mind body as a unit, as the coupled ecosystem as one, is actually the vehicle for insight, which is facilitated through a flow state, which then longitudinally across time that's the wisdom is related to wisdom. So what I'm wondering about is how can a disembodied kind of rationality ever attain it? Because I think part of the idea underpinning robotics and this AI, that many of the stories and the way it's being discussed as embodied, disembodied, we still have this Cartesian dualism, and not only Cartesian, it's really Platonic. It's really it's over 2,400 years old a tradition, kind of going through Plato and then Descartes and then Immanuel Kant for epistemology, and now we are kind of at the end of it. And we haven't had the time to kind of leave it. We kind of rationally have, through quantum mechanics and quantum physics, we've realized that that's not the way to go. But evolutionarily, we haven't had the time to get used to it, I think. And a lot of those conversations are very dualistic. So I think that's one of the major problems of having conversations about this, for me at least.
Definitely, definitely. And so you mentioned so many topics. I mean, I'm my expertise is in robotics, yes, and you said the word. So I'm like, even today, Harari, yes, he was thinking of, how about now robots can be more intelligent than us? I mean, in the near future, right? Let's say we attain close to the singularity, and all these robots now embodied, yes, looking like us, wandering around us and creating their own societies. Will they create their own societies, or will they help us be more wise, as you say, so that emergent and conversation and guide us toward the light? There are so many questions there. But when it comes to robotics, the robotics as I know it, besides that kind of singularity intelligence, it is algorithmic, right? And especially the embodied one. Yeah, we are very concerned how the arm moves and what does it do and how to do it with precision, much more than, okay, what would the wisdom do now with the arm? Yeah, so I think we have to shift the paradigm on its head as well to achieve something in that direction, which leads me to one important topic I wanted to touch with you. And but before this, I also want to salute the fact that you mentioned flow, because that is exactly, of course, that is the state that we were entering when I mentioned about this collective insight practice. We were all in flow and in sync somehow. And I think that's very important for emergence. And you mentioned singularity, that yes, the many intelligences that are there on the platform, these are, we call them multi-agent systems. And of course, emergence is a property of many intelligences like that, and we are creating a good infrastructure for that kind of exchange between agents to happen very fast, and to be able to give a good conditions for that kind of emergence that you are referring to. So maybe we can get to have multi-agent systems um, get in flow and emanate that wisdom. But this is just a dream of ours as researchers. So what I would like to ask you is about the alignment problem. Yes, speaking of how robots are designed today, and also how AI, and who is designing them for what purpose. And what is your take on the alignment problem in AI? First of all, can you state it? What is the alignment problem?
So,
And
as far as I understand it, alignment problem is the problem of how do we make sure that the artificial intelligence synthetic agent can will be aligned with human values, right? Is that roughly what's so
yeah, I would agree with with
with
this
human values, with like
this definition of the problem. Yes, but that
right
is our quest and the topic of the podcast anyway.
exactly. So so obviously the first thing that comes to mind, myself, who I've been studying ethics as part of my philosophy training. So human values is nothing really well defined, and especially for me, again, back to Nietzsche, it was he claimed the death of God about 150 years ago. He said, he kind of noticed this nihilism in which we're drowning right now in our culture. He noticed it then already, seeing that we've kind of everything became kind of instrumentalized as gradually um, the sacred was fleeing from the world, as it were, right? Like people cared about um, maybe short-term pleasure, calculating, capitalism emerging, ideologies and stuff like that, and people cared, what used to be. I mean, obviously, uh,
I mean, we call it utilitarian, right? I mean, yeah,
utilitarian,
yeah,
like so utilitarian kind of approach to
yeah.
living, and the sacred dimension of life kind of became relegated to this kind of one day per year, 1 day per week rather than 24/7. And that is not to say that he wasn't critical. He was a severe critic of institutional religion, but at the same time he understood that the fact that the religion provided this continental sense making for everyone, whether you're a king or a peasant or whoever, yeah, everyone in between, everyone refers to the same system of values, despite the tyranny and everything else. But now it's like we have arrived. We are in this post modern era where who is to decide what the values are, and then that was his problem. Like because people consider Nietzsche to be a nihilist, but I really don't think he was, because he was he was struggling with this for the rest of his life. Like he noticed the nihilism, and then like, so how do we overcome it? How do we, what sort of sacred games we will have to invent? And we see what we have invented. We invented Instagram, Hollywood, and all of these distractions that actually draw us away from caring about the values. So now, if we say, how do we've produced this wonderful technology, which is limited to instrumental reasoning, right? Because it's a means to ends protocol based problem solving um, algorithm. So it's by definition instrumental. But then if we then map it onto human agency, when humans are merely instrumental, we have many thinkers across the spectrum. We have the critical theory that talk about Adorno and Horkheimer and Habermas talking about instrumental rationality, instrumental reason. Then we have even Heidegger talking about calculative versus meditative, and he says like the calculative one is taking over. And then I think Ian McGilchrist really synthesizes beautifully all of those strands from previous centuries, and he kind of embeds it in neuroscience and psychiatry. And I think we are kind of, as a culture, we are not even aligned with our own purpose. So how can we then produce tools that will be aligned, right? So I think the problem is, first of all, and here I'm talking through Heidegger, who did, he had a critique of techno-scientific thinking. He said, like, we got so fixated on technical thinking that we've forgotten that the technology itself is nothing technical. It's actually metaphysical. It's a different kind of being. It's a different kind of animal. And we kind of swap these contexts when we talk about human life and techniques and ethics, and it often there is no distinction between how we should approach these different topics. So when we talk about problem of alignment and the problem of how these intelligent agents should be aligned with human values, though, first of all, we need to define human values. But I'm not sure if even using the word define is accurate, because it's already within the left hemispheric kind of representational matrix, right? So I think when we're talking about alignment, we need to first realize, maybe we should dwell on Moloch a little bit and understand to what extent we have been colonized by Moloch, and to what extent that prevents us from even establishing what our values are, what it means to be human, and what it means to be humane in this world. I think that is, essentially an ethical question and metaphysical question. And then we can talk about the techniques of how to apply it and how to develop protocols and so on.
Absolutely, and totally agree. The thing is, I agree that we don't agree on values. Yes, and this is now, this is an election year in many parts of the world, And this comes to the fore right now, yes, especially here where I am in the United States, because I mean, really, the two sides, let's say the left and the right, they are really, they have at some point, really, they don't agree on some values which are fundamental, yes, like abortion, and I don't want to mention many others. I mean, it's religion and male female sexes and things like this. So they don't agree on things which would be, let's say, 100 years ago kind of non-issues. Yes, it's like uh it's okay, this is it, right? So it's not such an easy thing to define maybe, but to agree on values, right? So what would be your take on that, especially in the context of, I mean, how do we design the AI to agree with which kind of values?
Well, exactly. Well, in the context of what you just said, that people can disagree ideologically about things, which is healthy in a
But
way.
coming back to truth as well, I mean, I
Yeah,
personally, as a scientist, there are two sexes, right? So, okay, and then there are some different, dysphoria and so on and so forth. But that doesn't mean there are not two sexes. I mean, there's not a third sex.
yeah, I agree.
Anyways.
I agree, and by the
Yeah.
way, that I agree with you also. Also, this doesn't mean you are hateful in any way, as some people would
No,
argue, right?
exactly. Although
Exactly.
maybe I will be now cancelled because I said
Right.
it. So.
Yeah, exactly. I think it seems like we are both past that stage of fearing being cancelled. I think I'm sure you. I got cancelled several times. It's an amusing
Oh,
ordeal.
okay.
Now,
I admire you even more now, knowing that.
I
Okay,
think
great.
I think that
You are
I
my
think
friend then.
yeah, we're yeah. So the initiation, right? I think what I want to say. Um,
Yeah,
my
so if we don't agree on the values, right, and how do we define them, and how do we ever agree? And how do we design? The question is actually, yeah, which values do we put in the AI?
well,
If we,
exactly. So
in that wise AI which we are after.
okay, so last time I was asked this question was part of the research, and I was asked because that was to do with education, and this algorithm applied globally into a search engine. That's the proposal that was on the table, and um, in this particular study, I was asked as a participant to give a case. What would I? One of the questions was, what would I ask the designer? Because that design of such an algorithm would have to be trans-algorithmic. Trans-ideological, right? It couldn't be left a bit like 70% lefty and 40 righty, or vice versa. It would have to be as unbiased as possible, so the kids have access to resources across the political and ideological spectrum and then make their own mind. But obviously, what ideology does, this is also very fascinating. When the Consilience project came up, even before that, like war on sense making, and the tools we have developed, they brainwash us so much easier than they used to through just like press and television and radio and all the previous
The
machines,
algorithms
the
actually
algorithms as well.
brainwash
Yes.
us.
So
Yes.
so so it's so hard to um, actually notice that we are compromised, we are biased, right? So if that designer, let's say someone who spent, they had the education at one of the top technical universities, let's say in the US, uh, which have been biased towards, let's say, cultural Marxism over the past few decades.
That,
Uh,
that's a higher probability if it's a US
right, high
university.
probability,
I
let's say,
agree,
right?
especially a good one. Yes.
Exactly, and they have their own idea of what is good for humanity and what is ethical and so on, and that will be, without realizing, those values will be baked in. I recommend, maybe we can link below the article from the Consilience project. Technology is not values neutral, because this is
Amazing. Yes.
critical for this alignment problem. It shows how the values of the designer are embedded, uh, without often them even realizing, are embedded within the design, and then the design scales it up and amplifies whatever the bias there was initially. So obviously my answer to that was, what would I like, three questions or something I would ask the designer to ask themselves. I asked back to truth. I asked, what was the last time you lied to yourself? Because when we discover our own self-deception, that is the filter. That's one of the most uncomfortable realizations human being can have, but that is the litmus test for our ideological bias. Because when we realize we lie to ourselves, we develop a certain kind of humility, right? And we are that much closer to wisdom when we realize it's uncomfortable. So we condition ourselves to perhaps lie to ourselves less in the future. But it's we live in a culture where from every side we have banners and algorithms and everything kind of optimized for catering to our self-deception, right? So therefore it's so easy to believe in something that is biologically incorrect to be true as a collective, even, right? As a collective of intelligent, highly educated human beings. So the illusion, that the degree of illusion and the dimension of self-deception, as I've experienced it because I've been studying this particular issue for so long, it's just overwhelming, I find, in the culture. So first, how do we, for me, the question as an educator has been over the past, let's say, 3-4 years, like, how do I design courses? How do I reach out to people to help them maybe undo some of the conditioning, some of the biases, and so on, in a way that is, that is for them a discovery and not just being propagandized to and not being dictated to, but actually having the aha moment and actually develop the wisdom for themselves. So perhaps that would be the sort of AGI that would be able to do it. That would be a healthy AGI. But I mean, I don't know how we do that non-biologically with with an agent. Like, I know in biological system it can happen, but I don't know how it could happen in just an algorithm based system.
Yes, and so many, of course, and we will, and I will ask you for links to which we can add when we release the podcast, of course, including this article from the Consilience Project, which you referred to. And, so very nicely, you actually exemplified how wisdom emerges, because it's like a process of self-awareness. Yes, so from a departure from that self-deception, I become aware, and the aha moment, and I can already feel the wisdom flowing through me with the truth. And again, yes, information is connection. So I assume many people connect through self-deception, right? In many, yeah, they connect through the lies, and it's like, okay, but I don't think it's enough. So here, I more or less disagree with Yuval, that yes, it is connection, but I think the ultimate quest is still for the truth and for this self awareness and stepping out of self deception. But now, because you mentioned that, I think from what I understand, you are also counseling people and helping them to step out of their own self deception. Can you tell me a bit about your experience with that and what led you to that kind of work, which I think it's really crucial? And I will tell you why I'm asking. I'm asking because our founder, Dr. Ben Goertzel, actually, he supported the design of an app, which is doing no more nor less teaching people to meditate. And of course, there are many, many apps for that. And he started that with thought to that, if the developers of the singularity, from the software developer to those who are designing it, are going to be enlightened, then the singularity will be successful. And it relates to the integral philosophy, to the experiences of flow, and to this wisdom aha moment, of course, which we get through this um, a process, yes, of meditation and rising above our limitation. And it's again transcendence. You mentioned to transcend the algorithm, to transcend our own self-deception. But what brought you to the same, more or less, kind of work? Yes.
Yeah, well, the self-deception is like specifically that, like explicitly, I think that's everyone's internal journey, I guess. Like I think relationships are very good teachers of that, right? Because depending on everyone's background, but actually, it's a personal story. I was involved in a personal relationship, intimate relationship, And that was the same time I was actually at university working on this topic of truth versus the tension in Nietzsche between truth and self-deception, because Nietzsche argues like, yeah, and the Plato would say that truth is good, right? And then that translated into Christianity, and then after Christianity, that became science. That the science, that truth is good in Christianity, truth is God is good, and then the truth is the science, so it's knowledge, and it's good. But then obviously Nietzsche had to look into it, and it's like, hang on a minute, like sometimes truth is not actually good. When we have a friend, and a friend is in a super difficult, let's say, relationship that may be abusive, and they are not ready to yet hear the truth from us, we already know that it's really super bad for them, but they're so much in love, right? And we don't, arguably, we will not tell them the truth too early. We want to wait, not to crush them,
To
arguably that
connect, yes,
to
as
connect.
Harari,
So yeah,
yes.
so the compassionate approach would be to
Yeah.
sometimes withdraw from telling the truth, right? Like you said, it would be a wise thing not to say all the truth sometimes. uh, and similarly, sometimes deception is necessary, right? Even though we would like to avoid it as much as we can, but deception is a part of sometimes survival in some systems if they're pathologized, if they are corrupted, and there certainly it would be foolish to be truthful in a circle of liars, right? Because that's a multiple. That's worse. It's basically it's handing yourself over to predation. So there are both, there's both a good there's always good side to lying and bad side to truth. But yet, that my question was the tension between Nietzsche kind of championing lies and yet being a disciple of truth, because he was, and he
Nietzsche and
recognized that himself.
Harari, yes.
Yes. So we still are, we still are disciples of truth, even though we like to say that it's something rational, but it's actually something metaphysical. We just carry over that burden, well, in a Nietzschean sense, that the burden of we align with the truth. But in my experience, I was working on all of this deeply, kind of thinking about these things, and at the same time, I was examining that relationship, that was intimate relationship, and I already knew I was bullshitting myself. I already rationally understood that I should be leaving the situation, but I wasn't ready. So I was examining my own self-deception. That was very, I guess, quite painful, but at the same time was profoundly authentic experience to embody. So I could embody what I was studying, and I wrote that essay. I'm very happy with that essay, actually. And I did. The relationship continued, but I had to examine these painful moments of self-deception and deceiving one another, and all of that. And I think without that personal embodied experience of something, we are not. I don't think human beings can actually be wise, right, in the full sense. Like, we have to have that, like what you said, the experiential engagement with anyone, a theoretical notion that we are very clever about in our writing or something. So for me, it was very kind of comprehensive experience, because it was both on a personal level and then on a theoretical level, when it was being the all academic kind of tools had to be in place. And that's why ever since I've been very passionate about, especially when you scale it up and you see it in a culture, how ideology fosters self-deception, how social media fosters self-deception, how it creates these crises within our reality, right? And it's almost like impenetrable, but there are injections of reality into that system. We see that on social media. There's sometimes a drop of authenticity can really disperse a lot of kind of inauthenticity, if you like. So I, as much as the simulation in which we live is kind of absorbs all opposition, I don't think we can afford to renounce our agency as, let's say, bearers of truth or seekers of truth. We should be aiming for it, and both academically and in an embodied, real interpersonal sense.
Yes, and thank you so much for sharing that personal story and your personal experience that led you on this path, because it's very important, of course, for each and every one of us, and especially for the mission as our as Ben Gertzel. Yes, I mean, maybe through meditation we can get there, but as far as I know, a relationship or someone comes into our life to point us to a part of ourselves which needs healing, and to heal, as you mentioned, those injection points or acupuncture points, however you want to call it, are so beneficial. Although in the moment it may be, of course, a lot of work, distress may be painful, but it's very important. So and the second part of my question was, so based on your experience then, that led you to this, let's say, realization, yes, that you were self-deceiving yourself, and then how to be more authentic. So how did you decide to actually help others, or it just
Right.
happened?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess once you feel liberated, the only thing, because that's a big step. Like sometimes you really have to step into the dark and become the hero of that unknown realm, right? Like you need to really reinvent yourself and reconstitute your values
Yes.
and everything, and live yourself
Yes,
into
everything is demolished, of course. That is
completely.
a deception takes everything away.
Yes, and you have to be able to step into that and actually reconstitute. And I think once you do it once you do it twice, it becomes each time becomes easier. And after a couple of times, you realize it's an illusion. Really, there is no security in lying to yourself, simply for safety or for an illusion of safety. So the only thing, me as I've always been teaching people and tutoring and coaching. So well, the one thing that you want to do is to help others liberate themselves into that more truthful relationship to themselves, right? It's like, because it's such a game changer. It really is, like it's, you know so so what I also realized is that's what I had been doing anyway, but in a more kind of more maybe unconscious
Personal relationships,
way.
maybe, and so on, but not as a coach,
But
right?
no, no,
So,
no, no. Even in education, yes, like or the seeking in different ways. I was kind of different things I was interested in, and the way I was kind of approaching educating others. It had that strand already, but after that moment, and then especially after I started reading more and learning more, and then the big breakthrough was 2020, and when we started seeing all of these smart people on podcasts. And I think then with I really dived into the propaganda and the ideology and narcissism, especially narcissism as a condition. And that really like made me reevaluate everything. Um, and that's what I've been teaching since. Actually, that's what I've been working with people, looking into different behavioral, scientific, neurological and psychological, spiritual, and also like different religious traditions, how they approached it prior to the scientific paradigms. Same kind of questions, same kind of human needs addressed in more mythical way. So all of that I'm very passionate about, really, like the human mind and consciousness, how through different technologies in different ages we both deceive ourselves, and yet we also achieve a new levels of consciousness in a strange, paradoxically parallel fashion, right?
amazing. And now, of course, you touched, yeah, you said the word consciousness. Yes, so we have to, you condemned yourself so that we, of course, delve into that topic. But, because you said you associated now consciousness with this, what I would call more like awareness, right? And it's so consciousness, yes, but I think what you achieved with your friends was more like awareness, right? Not necessarily. And at least the question is, if you want to clarify, is there a difference between consciousness and awareness, or is it's the same in this context, or
That's a good question. uh wouldn't consciousness be more like an ether kind of, because I don't believe it originates in the brain. It's probably like the whole
The
kind of spectrum
substrate of everything, right?
of everything. It just saturates the universe, and then the awareness is more like a psychological, perhaps, when we
And then the
become
awareness is like,
self-aware.
okay, I feel this consciousness. Okay,
Right,
I'm
something
aware
like
of
that.
it.
I am self-aware, right? Oh, this is my hand. Or oh, I've just thought something, so I'm metacognitive. So I'm meta-aware. I'm self-aware because I'm aware of my own cognitive process. So that's how I would say.
So
Would you
consciousness
agree?
is meta awareness.
No, I would say maybe I never thought of this actually. How the difference between consciousness and awareness, but right now on the spot, I would probably say that consciousness is this kind of non-personal, that the saturation of reality with I don't know, with
Yeah.
with
No, no,
awareness,
because
perhaps. I don't know.
so yeah, because it is I mean, like scientists recently, as you know, Donald Hoffman, yes, the case against reality, he actually mathematically is proving there is a universal consciousness, and that he even postulates that consciousness creates brains and not the other way around. Yes, and it's very related to what you say. And then there is another book called One, How an Ancient Idea Holds the Future of Physics, written by a quantum physicist, a theoretical physicist from Germany, which actually says practically the same. Yes, there is this one consciousness, and we are like islands stepping into it, or with our awareness. So it's very interesting to hear your perspective, even independent of those works, because it seems to me
Interesting, yes,
maybe
because
yes.
I didn't actually. But it's a good question because we always hear awareness and consciousness, and I kind of use them interchangeably. I never really actually stopped to wonder about the distinction, but it's helpful if you say that professionals that help you define it.
Yes.
So I got a good intuition, so I'm glad.
So and you mentioned now intuition. So we have to delve
We
into
have to delve
intuition
into
and
intuition.
in Il McGilchrist and all that. And I am, of course, intuition is like a mystical property, right? How does this happen? And it's again related to that insight, aha moment, well, at least eventually to wisdom. Um, what would you have to say about intuition? What is that? How can we
Right.
tackle
Well,
it?
it would be because yeah, there's this. I guess the battle that I know from the philosophical side is that reason versus intuition, and intuition is unreliable, and reason is more reliable, and so that's. But I think, we need both. First of all, we need both reason and intuition. We need the mind and the heart, and they must be in sync. So then, where the process of alchemy is actually functional, right? When we think and we understand the same thing as we feel. What is intuition? It seems to me that intuition uh, is something that maybe evolved in us, right? Through adaptively somehow that or when we what is an let's say something people can relate to. If you're a professional, let's say um, you're a very good you've been a mechanic for 30, 50 years. Like, some things you just know, you don't have to reason through them, you don't have to do algorithmic processing on every uh, part of your trade like you've done. And so sometimes you can just you can trust your judgment just like that. And some that you can hear a sound from an engine and you kind of know. It's I don't know. To be honest, I never studied intuition. I haven't read the Matter with Things, so I guess I should dive into that. But it seems to me like it's an evolutionary. It's a kind of would it be a conditioning, emergent property of conditioning of some kind? Would you help me? What do you know about intuition?
So first of all, let's take this matter with things to tell our audience that it is the latest book of Ian McGilchrist, which is a follow-up from The Master and the Emissary, which is his masterpiece. And this one is even a more thick book in 2 volumes, which is amazing. Yes, and in which
No,
he
is that
talks about
these 2 volumes that
how we have been hijacked by bureaucracy and rationality in our society today, and that we have subjugated our intuitive mind, which is actually our greatest gift. And Einstein mentioned that, yes. And that intuitive mind is more or less related to what you are talking about, this higher consciousness, that this kind of we know, this kind of knowing, yes.
Right.
And of course, you can look at it, and I mentioned that aspect of it, yes, when I said, okay, so now I'm with my grandkids, I'm going to deal much better than with my kids because of the experience, and that makes me wise. That is one thing about this expert in mechanical things, yes. Intuition, I think it is deeper, and it comes more like in the sense of Ian McGilchrist, and I really recommend that book. That we can tap into that universal knowing, and we have it in us from birth, and then unfortunately education and all this rational thinking that we are caged in is I mean, we don't appreciate. We don't appreciate that. And this comes back to truth. Because Ian McGilchrist says that there is a universal truth. And by the way, Michael Shermer agrees. So if you have heard, he said, yes, there is a universal truth, and we can find it if you listen to that podcast. And that's what Ian McGilchrist says. There is this universal truth, and we know it, and that we know it intuitively, and we know when something is wrong. And those values, speaking of alignment that you are talking about, when we refer to alignment with regard to, yes, um, artificial intelligence and values, those values are already in us. We are born with them, and that's what he's saying. It would be, of course, good to, he's saying it in 2 volumes and thousands of pages, so I'm just trying to summarize it here. I have limited time with you, and I have so many more questions to ask, but if you want to, um, I mean, I think, in that regard, at least from my perspective, it could help us solve with the alignment problems. But do you think that we can create intuitive machines? What's your take?
Right. Think about it. What I've been thinking about, as you were talking, is intuition is inherently non-quantitative, isn't it? We can't
Yes.
quantify it, and that's the
Yes.
problem with it, right? Like with reason, you can do logic, you can do A to
I
B
mean,
and
is
everything.
love quantitative? I mean, so many things
Exactly.
are not
As love,
quantitative.
respect,
Beauty, I mean,
loyalty, beauty.
the most
Exactly.
important things are not quantitative. Right?
Exactly. So see, the most fundamental dimensions of human experience cannot be scientifically analyzed, right? They are incompatible with scientific or techno-scientific language, even. And yet they are the most important. That's why, I would argue there's so much mental health problems, there's so much despair these days, because through the Enlightenment, we've brainwashed ourselves into thinking that all you need is reason and rationality. Yeah, no, you need reason and rationality. You don't want to be a fool, of course, but reason and rationality without intuitive, like curating within yourself and cultivating a healthy sense of intuition, you will not be able to compute everything. And therefore, I believe, because what can I do? I can only speculate, but I think that consciousness has it's probably partially computational, but it will have this non-computational aspect, which perhaps is the dimension of intuition. So the question for me would be, is that compatible with algorithmic processing or not? Right? That would
Mhm.
be my
And Daniel said no. so,
no.
so we have some answer. Let's see. But yeah, Kurzweil wrote a book. I don't know if you came across it, which is called "The Age of the Spiritual Machines."
Yes, I read it about like 12 years ago.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
and I was
it's
already
very related to the unquantitative thing and metaphysics and your stuff
yes.
there. So
So he believes it's fully computational, right? Just as Bostrom does.
uh,
That
uh,
consciousness is fully computational.
yeah, like I actually underlined in that post on LinkedIn about sentience. Yes,
Yes,
because yeah, we can express in numbers. Yes, all these things,
in
and
mathematics.
Leibniz and many others have contributed step by step. And Yosha Bach, which I
Oh, I
posted
like him.
his talk, yes, he actually is the best at explaining that. He has also multiple publications and a talk which is in my, and I will post that LinkedIn post, because I also included a link to one of his talks in which
I
he
know. So
explains it
I've been
so well.
watching that, but because
Yes,
it's been busy week, like all these links, like they came through Tuesday. But I like this talk. I am like halfway through because he talks about
yes.
metaphysics. Then he links these two worlds very well in clear language. So I like his
Exactly.
position.
So, then coming back to this, yes, intuition, spiritual machines, and let's hope we can design those, algorithmic or not. But
Well,
I
that's
think we
it. I
can.
want
I
to hear
think
your
we.
opinion.
Yes, my opinion is yes. Especially that was the whole point of my post, and the whole point of Yosha Bach's talk and his publications. Yes, we can. And but my question is, how do we? I mean, how do we link that to your studies of metaphysics? I mean, what is metaphysics in the end? How does
Well,
that relate to
metaphysics
spirituality?
is the study of what things are and how they are qualitatively different, I guess. Right. So for me, a lot of my work is linked to language and how, because we live in language, we operate in terminology, we operate, in Latin or Greek concepts in our English as we're speaking English now. So what I'm really interested in as well is how the concepts or precepts, the fundamental concepts of our Western culture in this case, have changed meaning over time. And so let's say, for example, physis is a term that pre-Socratic Greeks, they used it to describe everything, not just the physical, not just nature, right? Physis was the totality of of the experience of reality. And then through Plato, this would be kind of, Ian McGilchrist would say, that's the kind of left hemisphere lateralization towards the end of the Greek democracy with Plato and then Aristotle. And it's kind of became more towards just the physical, like um, when in the Rome they translated physis into natura. Natura actually was just the natural world and not the supernatural world. So when we today say, and so that was the translation of physics, but you see when the meaning is already lost. So across, and then we have Descartes doing his own formatting. So I call it neurosemantic formatting. It's formatting not only the language, but through formatting of concepts, that the thinking is distorted. So the thinking of the whole culture is distorted. And where my work is right now is I'm trying to dig into these fundamental concepts, because we seem to be very misaligned with a lot of our industrialist language still in our cognitive science type of language and using computation metaphors, and it's incompatible with the quantum physics, which seems quite mystical. But at the same time, when we look at, let's say, Tao, seems fully compatible. So, but then what I found is that pre-Socratic Greeks were much closer, even though they were prior to all those revolutions that we have gone through. They were much closer to the quantum, the paradox, and all of those kinds of. McGilchrist argues for that. Heraclitus, right? So Heraclitus was much closer to the more accurate understanding of reality than, let's say, anything after Plato. So I think the job for me as a metaphysician is to perhaps translate it to help technologists kind of discover that some of this awareness of their own language, the awareness of the concepts, that they are not the neutral concepts. They are concepts that we have inherited, distorted from different cultures. Let's say Greeks, and then Romans, and then the Enlightenment and so on, and industrial thinking, and now computational thinking. And we always use the metaphors of the dominant technology of the age. So just a bit more awareness of because language is so important now for prompting and coding and everything, right? So how we even have conversations about these things, linguistics become, or philology becomes very important, right? With in terms of what things actually are, and to what extent they have been transformed and distorted throughout the ages.
Amazing. And so then somehow there's connection with mysticism as well when we think about consciousness and what we, know, I mean, intuition also, right? Things which we cannot define precisely. So where is mysticism coming into the picture? Because I know you are also preoccupied with
Oh,
this.
yeah. So mysticism is what is like an experiential dimension of what most people would understand as religion, rather than dogmatic, rather than subscribing to some sort of church or um, a system of dogmas. It's more, I guess it's like ancient wisdom again. It links. It's really close to wisdom, right?
Yes,
And
that's why I
it
brought it
emerged from
up.
shamanism
Yeah.
and different. I guess mysticism for me, what's most important is that it doesn't really matter which religion, because it's the same thing, having different names across different peoples and different traditions. But I think, what was it? Who said that? I think Meister Eckhart, a German mystic, medieval mystic, he said, theologians can argue about everything, but all mystics speak the same language. So, it's like theologos. So if you apply logic, apply Aristotle to the mystical, to the sacred, you actually already objectify that. You already reduce it to an object, to something that is less than anything sacred. Whereas the mystical, let's say the liminal space, when these days a lot of people talk about psychedelic experiences, for example, right? And how close that is to this kind of ecstatic trance of a liminal space of actually. And it's very similar to crisis, like you said, when you have to reconstitute everything, your entire sense making, your entire identity. Sometimes I think that is essentially what mysticism as a technology, as a psychotechnology is. It's a psychotechnology of self-transformation for me, I guess. And yeah.
Because to me, you see, I mean, all these things which are impalpable, let's put it with, because we not yet we cannot put them into numbers. Yes, intuition, spirituality, consciousness are like they can be like they are mystical. Yes, it's like how do you? Okay, now what? Consciousness. There is a consciousness in the air, which there is. Oh wow, it's it's like okay, I believe in that, but I cannot touch it. So it has a lot to do with whatever. I don't want to call it religion, but spirituality and so on. And I think this is very much related to that, at least for me. So I would like to move now to creativity. And you are a musician as well. Yes, I don't know if you have other talents when it comes to arts
Cooking.
and creativity. Sorry?
Cooking. I'm just laughing. Yes, I
Cooking, that's
I
also
like to cook.
creative.
Yeah, but
Amazing.
it is great.
Yes,
Yeah, it's
yes.
creativity. Yes, yes, definitely.
I
Uh,
envy you. I don't have that skill, although it would be more useful if I would have it as a woman. But okay, let's not go there. So, so, yes, but as a musician, right? And we will link some of your recordings with your famous band in Poland. Yes, it's fantastic.
we used to be a no, it's not famous right now. It's kind of a steep. I haven't been playing music for a long time now. I really ache to get back to it because it's the atavism of it. The rock and roll is still, it's
Yes,
demanding its attention from me. So I think
exactly.
I really, I think next year I will try to pick it up.
But I listened to it, and it's really amazing, and
Which one did you listen? Because there's instrument.
it brings me to uh, the point which I want to make. And I have a book here
Uh huh.
which is called, I don't know if you can see, it's called The Sound of the Future. But before I talk about that, I wanted to say that our founder, Dr. Ben Goertzel, is also a musician and a rock musician as well. And so we have a he has several bands, but one of them in which we have a robot singer and a composer as well. So it's fascinating to hear him sing and the robot sing as well, and he is also, of course, playing instruments. And the question which I want to tackle when it comes to creativity is, of course, related to artificial intelligence. Yes, not necessarily what piece from you I like the most. So I like all of them. I may not remember the title now because I listened immediately when you sent me the link. So, so creativity. Do you think that we can design? I mean, we already have machines, algorithms. Let's not call them machines. Algorithms that compose, right? And they do kind of good music, I have to say, because an algorithm in our robot, Desdemona, it is actually composing some interesting stuff which they are playing. The band Jam Galaxy. So, what's your take on that, on machine and algorithmic creativity as an artist, as a musician? Do you see it as a threat? Do you see it as someone which you can co-create with?
Um,
Uh,
I think it's not a threat. No, I actually I've done a few talks with a friend of mine who's a contemporary painter from England, and we did discuss this. One of them, AI and generative AI, and I think there is no threat because art is a reflection of human reality. I mean, the human art is a reflection of human reality. Artificial agent can have its own reality, but it cannot have a human reality. So it's always going to be it can feed on artifacts of humans, right? But it ultimately it will not have the same history, the same experiences. Even if it, let's say, it's sentient and it feels pain and it
but
feels.
I can. I'm sorry to say that.
Uh-huh.
No, I don't want to contradict you, but I just have to say the same can be said about me and you. We don't have the same. Why you would no, draw a different drawing or paint a different painting than I would. And the same with poetry. I would write a different one than you, even if I give you the same title. So this is not a difference between humans and machines necessarily. And don't forget, my question is also about. So one is, what do you think about their creativity? Is that creativity? And can
It's a
they?
simulation of creativity because
Okay,
by definition it's an artifice of creativity, artificial agent, so it's an artifice, and that's
I
fine.
disagree, but it's okay. No, we I don't want to delve into that. I'm
Sure.
very interesting, however, to hear from your perspective because I'm a poet, yes,
Uh-huh.
and I co-create. I'm so ready to co-create with AI into poetry, right? And it's like it helps me
I saw that,
become,
yeah.
yes, uncover new dimensions which I wouldn't have found, right? And it is I mean many in many other areas like even in Go, yes, I mean it's a game, right? And but ancient people for thousands of years have perfected that game, and when artificial intelligence came into the picture it showed them that there are so many more strategies than they could come up over thousands of years. And I think that's also that's creativity to me. And it's
Yes.
the same with music and with poetry and so on. I mean, of course, you can call it artificial, you can call it human, but creativity, I think it's a universal, and it is about building such, finding new ways of expression. And in my opinion, AI, I don't think there is a difference really, and I think they will be better than us, like with Go, yes, in finding new ways of expression. It can be in a Go strategy or in a poem or in music. So this is my opinion, and sorry to shove it on you just because I completely so disagreed with your take. But
That's
please
good. We need that.
come back to your take and
Uh-huh.
contradict me. I would be so happy from your perspective as a musician.
Totally. Yes. No, I think there's some maybe when for myself, I'm quite romantic, I guess, in terms of music, and I like romantic. I like William Blake. I like the emotional dimension of human struggle and strive, and I like existential philosophy. So for me, obviously, the reality of art or of creativity stems from this dimension of human strife, and if that like the machine is using it purely instrumentally, deep embodied reality of human condition is missing for me. But this is not to say that I discard it. And in the sense that you said how it can help you, I mean, obviously we will have to. We have always used the tools of the day to enhance our own cognitive capacities and creative and everything else, and we will do it again. I'm not a Luddite, so I think there is a place for every technology, whereas I think there's also a risk where people kind of outsource too much of their cognition, right? And they just basically replace their own thinking and their own writing with the machine only because
Self-deception, it will help us in that direction then,
yes,
right?
because you actually well, yeah, like think about it.
Yeah.
Literacy if it has evolved. Since then, we can actually reflect on our own thoughts. Before that, we could not. So it really enhanced our cognition and our cognition and consciousness. Like we could actually realize what I wrote yesterday. Does it still make sense? Right? Is
Exactly.
it? And
Exactly.
the idea of time, even like it's day now, and then at midnight I read it, and obviously it's not true. So what is truth? And there's so many things through writing we actually develop the critical thinking and metacognition. So if people, I believe a lot of people will end up there, like they will completely outsource their literacy to these agents, to these GPT machines. They will be that much easily that they will not be able to think properly, and they will be that much easily fooled by not only the machines but any other human that seems to
Yeah,
want to
and that is
manipulate
a
them.
big danger. And actually, it delves into somehow, into what this book is saying. Although the book is not saying it like you. So the book again is coming. It's the coming age of voice technology, the sound of the future, right? And the idea is that now it is so important. I mean, to pay attention to these artificial things, yes, intelligences, however you want to call them, beings, entities, um, that will become like us. And when they will start to speak in a very compelling voice, it's very dangerous. I imagine Hitler's talk in a very sweet, soft, compelling voice, uh, making you believe that it is right what he is saying and things like this. So it can be very deceiving, speaking of self-deception, and they can become very dangerous. And not only in the sense in which you mentioned that it's going to actually it can make us less creative because we would only rely on their creativity, but I personally would like to co-create with them, right? So what's your take on that? Like the sound
Yeah,
of the future?
so I'm aligned with Zach Stein on this issue. Zach Stein had this podcast with Nate Higgins, and he did say that because when we, yeah, look, people will be becoming more and more lonely, and there's this argument, oh, maybe if someone's really lonely, they should have this artificial companion. And how can you deny people that? You can't deny it, right? But then what will happen is they will start relating to that creature, and then, well, synthetic agent, and then they will go, let's say they spend 8 hours per day with that, and then they will go into the world and they will relate in the same way to a human being. So ethically there will be Zach calls it ethical rift. It will be very
Yes, and speaking
confusing.
of that, can I ask you one but last question? So then, given this, coming back to this ethics, can we guarantee that AI will be beneficial? Is there a way to embed those ethical values in it if we even don't know, I mean, how to define them or don't agree on them? What is your take?
Exactly. Well, you ask me, I ask you. Like, who am I to say?
We can leave it open because that's a quest, and I
That's a big
invite you to join the quest.
definitely. Yeah, you will need many more brains using compatible language to develop these ideas. But like one thing is for sure, we can't afford not asking these questions. We have to be
Yes.
able to engage with this stuff.
That's what doesn't let me sleep. Yes.
Yeah, as impossible as it seems, like somehow we keep going within this area. So especially with this, yeah, with the self-deception and yeah, because like sorry, back to your question, because I didn't actually I addressed the ethics, but not self-deception is kind of linked with ethics, but there's also a cognitive impotence, right? If you self-deceive. So I think it's if an agent is, let's say, optimized for always telling you what you like to hear, just like social media does it to us now, it's not actually good for you, right? It's not actually like in a relationship between two humans. If you have a good friend, if you are a long-term relationship, be it intimate or friendship or family or whatever, you actually appreciate being challenged. You appreciate having someone telling you you're full of shit about something, because that will help you grow. And it comes, you trust them, it comes from a good place. You wouldn't want to hear it from someone you don't know, but right, the relationship is not linear. It has to have conflict embedded within it in order to have reconciliation
And
on
that
the
is
higher level,
again, yes,
right? And
wisdom, how to, when to say it, how to say it. But that's why, this voice saying it can be also very positive. Yeah, it can help us if we have an AI counselor who knows how
right,
to guide us, how to point to the truth in a sweet voice, and when to tell us that, when to whisper that in our ear. That's it. There are many things which we can actually work on, and where artificial intelligence can help us, and maybe we can co-achieve, by working together with them, co-create that beneficial world which we hopefully will attain. But related to that, is my last question, which I usually ask most of my guests here on the podcast, and that is, and especially for you, because you are a philosopher of life. Yes. So what is the meaning of life?
well, what is it for you? I don't know. Like everyone has their own, I guess. What
So
is meaning?
and so then I will just say, okay, so what is the meaning of life for Adam with dubs?
Yes, what is it?
Okay,
What
I
is the meaning?
rephrase it. Rightfully so, yes.
Well, we should do things that, I guess, first of all, there's a lot of things we can do that are nice, that are instrumentally important, right? Like, you have a nice job to pay your bills, and you have nice bicycle or computer or
That's
something.
utilitarian.
That's
Okay, coming
utilitarian. So
back.
that's one thing, right? But then something that's existentially important, I think everyone needs some sort of mission that actually makes us get up in the morning and makes us, make sacrifices, and it makes all the hardship worthwhile, because there's something kind of more important than our own little individualistic existence. So I
Like for
think
me, find the beneficial
finding beneficial idea.
AGI before we achieve the beneficial way, the road to beneficial before we achieve the singularity, right? How can
Right.
I sleep until I
Yes.
know if we know the way? And how it for you?
Yeah, so for me, it's, I don't know, I don't have an end goal, I guess, but I just like when I spend a day and I could meaningfully contribute, and I feel good about the work I've done, and I had a sound conversation with someone, and I discovered something new. Little things, but yeah, I think everyone should have something that drives them, and intrinsically, I guess, intrinsic interest in something that actually, even if they were not, even if they were kind of died tomorrow, they would still be, they would care about that thing to be going on. So it could be music for
They
some
would
people,
be on mission. Like, what
could be
is yours?
gardening, yeah, it could be anything, but be passionate about something deeply, and have intrinsic interest in things, and share it with others. And I think that's what human life is about ultimately. It's we do have ideologies and religions and everything else, but it all boils down to actually being able to do something of value and of existential meaning, and share it with others. And that's our story, isn't it? And we're
What
striving
is
with it
what
now,
is
because,
your intrinsic mission?
well, you think I don't, you pin me down now. I don't know what's how to
I mean, you
uh
ask all of us to find it. No, I'm like, did you?
I guess, well, I guess my mission in the broad terms is to be able to be of service while also improving myself. It's in very broad general terms to do. Yeah, there is no one thing.
No, because that's what you actually do, yeah, as a coach and all that, and as a philosopher. So, and you told us your personal story, right? You said I started with myself, and now I am spreading the good to others and
Yeah, that
coaching
yeah,
them
I
how
mean
to do
that
it.
has been, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
enjoyable, and be healthy and be happy, and help
And
people
can
do
I
the same.
ask you,
Hmm.
because I thought, it would be related also with your innate and intrinsic talent as a musician, obviously. So, what led you to get into a band and to
ah
study guitar and so on and so
ah
forth? You see, so that's intrinsic, I think, and
yeah,
maybe
that's one of the
related to
projects.
your mission too, right? So,
Yeah, but I mean, I wouldn't call, because I'm interested in many things. You know, I like a philosophy of technology. I like music. I like education. I like different
yeah, I'm
disciplines.
sorry, we just
Study,
have very, very few
but yeah,
seconds left.
sure. But music,
We
well,
have
I was
another episode about all the
sure.
other ones.
Okay, music is well. I was born in Poland in a Roman Catholic family, and I just didn't like the strictures of religion, the dogma, and I think I was like this black sheep in the family. And when I discovered, like, first time, it was like first rock, like there was like rock bands, but then the real game changer was Black Sabbath. When I discovered Black Sabbath, was like,
Mhm.
boom, wow, this is
Yeah,
it.
they're great.
And then like more modern bands, and then I go into death metal, black metal, like all this kind of dark stuff, and I just loved the energy, and I always wanted to have this band. And so it took me quite a while, but then yeah,
You taught yourself guitar?
yeah, I taught myself the guitar, and I
Interesting.
always wrote lyrics and music
So you
first
see,
on
it
my
was intrinsic in you.
intrinsic, yes, but I don't see it as different from, let's say, philosophy, or from,
Yes,
like doing
because
all
you
the research.
found it naturally, and that is something. Yes, that is the point, I think, with what you're saying. Like, the meaning is, in you, and you find it when the time comes, the opportunity comes, you're gonna manifest
Right,
it.
and I like, and helping others discover that as well for
Yeah,
themselves. It's super
amazing,
satisfying, right?
super
When we can do
rewarding.
that.
Yes, and of course, then I'm very grateful that you have that mission because it's so needed, of course, and. It's wonderful to have found you. Another friend now cancelled many times, proudly so, I would say. So come to our podcast. We will definitely not cancel you. I hope to work together towards that beneficial singularity, to benefit from your knowledge, wisdom, and experience in many ways, as well as your creativity and talent. And thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope we can delve into the other passions which you have in a future episode. Thank you.
Likewise, thanks so much for a great chat. I look forward to catching up.